Good morning, grandkids. Well, that last book in this series, The Warrior, was kind of disappointing, wasn't it? They just did not write enough of the story in there. But it did introduce his brother and his sister, even though none of them, I don't guess, know each other. At least he doesn't know them, who they are. So let's hope this last book, The King, is going to have a little more enlightening information in it. And by the way, as some of you know, and as some of the newer ones don't know, this is the Bookshelf2. I had a previous bookshelf series, and it's in my playlist if you want to go look at it, because I read a lot of books in that series, and you might be interested in listening to them. And after we finish this book, I don't know what I'm going to start reading next week, because I've read so many. I'm going to have to look through things and see what I have read and what I haven't read yet before I can decide what next week will be. But you can go back and look at all those, listen to all those books too. All right, let's get on with this. The King. Gentle reader, you will not understand a word of what follows unless you have read and committed to memory the first 3 volumes in this series, Beggar, Thief, and Warrior, which leads up to this, the conclusion. I encourage you to seek them out at your favorite bookseller. right here. We last let Islif fleeing for his life, which was a common enough occurrence for him. He had stolen a lot of gold and one particularly large gem from a rich man in Yelenheim named Zoibud, his brother. The thief fled north, spending the gold wildly, as thieves generally do, for all sorts of illicit pleasures, which would no doubt disturb the gentleman or lady reading this, so I'll not go into detail. The one thing he held on to was that big gem. He didn't keep it because of any particular attachment, but because he did not know anyone rich enough to buy it from him. And so he found himself in the ironic situation of being penniless and having in his possession a gem worth millions. Well, the silly boy, he wouldn't be penniless if he wasn't spending it wildly. Will you give me a room, some bread, and a flagon of beer in exchange for this? He asked a tavern keeper in the little village of Cravenswald, which was so far north it was half situated on the Sea of Ghosts. The tavern keeper looked at it suspiciously. My tongue hardly will say that word, suspiciously. It's just crystal, Islif said quickly, but isn't it pretty? Let me see that, said a young armor-clad woman at the end of the bar. Without waiting for permission, she picked up the gem, studied it, and smiled not very sweetly at Islif. Would you join me at my table? I'm actually a bit in a hurry, replied Islif, holding out his hand for the stone. Another time. Whoops. Out of respect for my friend, the tavern keeper here, my men and I leave our weapons behind when we come in here, the woman said casually, not handing the gem back, but picking up a broom that was sitting against the bar. I can assure you, however, that I can use this quite effectively as a blunt instrument. Not a weapon, of course, but an instrument to stun, medicinally crush a bone or two, and then, once it is on the inside, mercy. Which table? Asked Islif quickly. He didn't want that broom handle shoved into him. The young woman led him to a large table in the back of the tavern, where 10 of the biggest Nord brutes Islif had ever seen were sitting. They looked at him with polite disinterest, as if he were a strange insect worth briefly studying before crushing. "My name is Lucifedra, aha, his sister," she said, and Islif blinked. That was the name Soybud had uttered before Islif had made his escape. "And these are my lieutenants. I am the commander of a very large, independent army of noble knights, the very best in Skyrim. Most recently, we were given a job to attack a vineyard in the Alto, to force its owner, a man named Larnu, to sell to our employer, a man named Soybud. Our payment was to be a gem of surpassing size and quality, quite famous and unmistakable. We did as we were asked, and we went to Soybud to collect our fee. He told us he was unable to pay due to a recent burglary. In the end, though, he saw things our way and paid us an amount of gold almost equal to the worth of the prized jewel. It did not empty out his treasury entirely, but it meant he was unable to buy the land in the Alto after all. So, we were not paid enough. Soybud has taken a heavy financial blow, and Larnu's prized crop of jazzberry has been temporarily destroyed for nothing." Lucifedra took a long, slow drink of her mead before continuing. "Now, I wonder, could you tell me how come you in the possession of the gem that we were promised?" Islif did not answer at once. Instead, he took a piece of bread from the plate of the savage bearded barbarian on his left and ate it. "I'm sorry," he said, his mouth full. May I?" "Of course I couldn't stop you from taking the gem even if I wanted to, and as a matter of fact, I don't mind at all. It's also useless to deny how it came into my possession. I stole it from your employer. I certainly didn't mean you or your noble knights any harm by it, but I can understand why the word of a thief is not suitable for one such as yourself." "No," replied Lucifedra, frowning, but her eyes showing amusement. "Not suitable at all." "But before you kill me," Islif said, grabbing another piece of bread, "tell me, how suitable is it for noble knights such as yourself to be paid twice for one job? I have no honor myself, but I would have thought that since Soybud took a profit loss to pay you, and now you have the gem, your handsome profit is not entirely honorable." He told her off a little bit, didn't he? Lucifedra picked up the broom and looked at Islif. Then she laughed. "What is your name, thief?" "Islif," said the thief. "We will take the gem as it was promised to us, but you are right. We should not be paid twice for the same job. So," said the warrior woman, putting down the broomstick, "you are our new employer. What would you have our army? What would you have your army do for you?" So she says that he's her new employer. Many people could find quite a few good uses for their own army, but Islif was not among them. He searched his brain, and finally it was decided that it was a debt to be paid later. For all her brutality, Lucifedra was a simple woman, raised, he learned, by the very army that she commanded. Fighting and honor were the only things she knew. When Islif left Cravenswall, he had an army at his beck and call, but not a coin to his name. He would have to steal something soon. As he wandered the woods, so this army doesn't hang around with him, even though it's considered his army now. As he wandered the woods, scrounging for food, he was beset with a strange feeling of familiarity. These were the very woods he had been in as a child, also starving, also scrounging. When he came out on the road, he found that he had come back on the kingdom where he had been raised by the dear, stupid, shy maid Druzeba. He was an arrow guard. It had fallen even deeper into despair since his youth. The shops that had refused him food were boarded up, abandoned. The only people left were hollow, hopeless figures so ravaged by taxation, despotism, and barbaric raids that they were too weak to flee. Islif realized how lucky he was to have gotten out in his youth. There was, however, a castle and a king. Islif immediately made plans to raid the treasury. As usual, he watched the place carefully, taking note of the security and the habits of the guards. This took some time. In the end, he realized there was no security and no guards. He walked in the front door, down the empty corridors to the treasury. It was full of precisely nothing, except one man. He was Islif's age, but looked much older. "There's nothing to steal," he said. "Would that there was." King Nop, though prematurely aged, had the same white blonde hair and blue eyes like broken glass that Islif had. In fact, he resembled Soybud and Lucifedra as well. And though Islif had never met the ruined landlord of the Alto, Larnu, he looked like him too. Not surprisingly, since they were all quintuplets. "So you have nothing?" asked Islif gently. "Nothing except my poor kingdom, curse it," the king grumbled. "Before I came to the throne, it was powerful and rich. But I inherited none of that, only the title. For my entire life, I've had responsibility thrust on my shoulders, but never had the means to handle it properly. I look over the desolation, which is my birthright, and I hate it. If it were possible to steal a kingdom, I would not lift a finger to stop you." It was, it turned out, quite possible to steal a kingdom. Islif became known as Nop, a deception easily done given their physical similarities. The real Nop, taking the name of Lekalnu, happily left his demesne, becoming eventually a simple worker in the vineyards of the Alto. For the first time, free of responsibility, he fell into his new life with gusto, and the years melting off of him. The new Nop called in his favor with Lucifedra, using her army to restore peace to the kingdom of Erldgard. Now that it was safe, business and commerce began to return to the land, and Islif reduced the tyrannical taxes to encourage it to grow. Upon hearing that, Soybud, ever nervous about losing his money, elected to return to the land of his birth. When he died years later, out of greed, he had refused to name someone an heir, so the kingdom received his entire fortune. Islif used part of the gold to buy the vineyards of the Alto, after hearing great things of it from Nop. And so it was that Erlgard was returned to its previous prosperity by the fifth-born child of King Edelaf, Eslif Errol, beggar, thief, warrior of sorts, and king. The end. So with each one of them, he did different things from what they had inherited and restored that kingdom. That's very cool. We don't know how long it took him. Evidently years, from what it said by about a couple of the others. But he did a good job, didn't he? From a little beggar to the king. Very cool book. So, like I said, next week I don't know what I'll read. I'll have to look back and see what I've done, what's left to read. So I'll see you all next Friday. I hope this book was a little more satisfying to all of you than the last one, The Warrior, was. It certainly was to me. I'm glad it had a good ending for everybody. So I will see you next week. Bye-bye, grandkids.